Okay, we are live.
I will bring this meeting of the Facilities Finance Committee to order and start off by asking if there's any public comment.
Not at this time, Mr. Hilton.
Then I'll turn this over to Mrs. Oakley and Mr. Willauer.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. I have a few project updates that are underway with school being out. We have the high school unit events project is off to a very good start with the units on the second floor being replaced. There are facade repairs being done. The contractor has started at Rupert in the courtyard, so they're working hard there. Fire alarm upgrades at the high school have begun this past week. And some exterior painting and pressure washing at Edgewood, which I'll share a picture in a second with that, is also being done. A few projects starting within the next week or so. The roof repairs at the high school will begin shortly. And at Rupert, we're going to be securing the area around a playground where there has been kickballs getting loose and getting onto the street during recess. So we're going to work on eliminating that issue there. Share my screen here. So here's a before and after of the main entrance at Edgewood. This is also before and after. There's a lot of pressure washing that needs to be done as well. So quite an upgrade with that. And my next item, we received a proposal for a new playground at Barth. This would be in the rear of the building. Next couple pictures will show the current equipment there, which there's a ball throw game, some bars out in the grass there. And then way out next to the arrow, that is the current swing set. So the next few slides will show the proposed layout. This area here, this is the current blacktop area. So the playground would come right off of the blacktop. So students didn't have to, and staff aren't way out to go to the swing sets and whatnot. It keeps everyone much closer and safer to the building. And so the fully inclusive design would be wheelchair access on a surface better than wood chip material for that, and activities for all children as well. Any questions at all?
So I'm happy to jump in and give. So the proposed cost of that playground is $213,000. We already received a grant for $15,000 towards that playground that we'd like to plan for installation in summer 2025. So this would go into next year's, we could plan for it, could go into next year's budget. The cost to the district would be a little less than $200,000. And my recommendation would be to take that funding. Obviously, we could work on potentially getting additional grant funding to support that. But right now, it would be about $198,000 of district funds. We do have some capital fund money set aside, currently $9 million. So my projection would be if we didn't want to put it in the budget for next year, we could pull it from the capital improvements fund.
There being nothing further on that item. Are there others? Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to ask Mrs. Oakley what her recommendation is from where we pull it.
Yeah, I would say
we could budget it, right? And then if we got grants, obviously, but where would you?
I would pull from the capital improvement fund.
Okay. Thank you.
And my last item is just that the hero letter is out for the district, so that information will be available in my office and will be posted on the website as well. So we just received that, so that update is current and available. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Willauer. Not seeing any other hands up now that I'm better at figuring out where everybody else is. Thank you very much for that information, and I'll turn it over now to Mrs. Oakley.
Okay, good evening, board members, committee members. The list of contracts this time of year is quite lengthy, and that's due to the timing of our annual renewals. Mainly special education contracts. There's 13 different placements, as you can see the list, and these will be available tomorrow on your board docs if you would like to look at any of them. In addition to the special education, we have our contracted security guards through advanced protection, our bus boss software for next year, our Title I Family Services of Montgomery County agreement, and the one additional that I received yesterday was Lincoln Center. It's for our Beach Street Learning Studio. It's our mental health professional, and that will be grant funded this year through the BSCA grant. Also, this time of year, we have all of the end of year financial resolutions, and this is the budget transfer resolution, which allows us to shift the funds from one area, one expenditure line item to another, so that as we receive new grant funding, we can allocate for those expenditures. Our committing funds for our financial statements, our depositories, which is our list of banking institutions that we utilize, and our investment resolution, which allows us to invest funds, as far as making investments on behalf of the district. And as you all know, interest rates are up. So this year, we've done a lot better than we have in past with investment of funds, and we plan to have some of that investment proceeds in next year's budget as well. Where we'll go after that, I don't know. We'll have to wait to see where the economy takes us. And the last item that I had is part of our budget for this year, which is our property tax rent and rebate program. And all of the resolution has been finalized. The application has been finalized. That is getting legally reviewed right now. And just as a reminder, that is the program that we are going to put in place with this year's budget. If we decide to continue with that program in future years, we would do an annual resolution every year, and we would decide what amount we want to put towards that bucket of tax relief. I will pause because I see a question.
Yeah, I just was curious. I know it's been being reviewed. Will it be ready by next week?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it will. Yep, it will absolutely be ready for next week. And it is very similar to the programs that are out there. So North Penn was gracious enough to share all the documents, their resolution, their application. So we kind of pretty much mimicked what they have in place. They've had this program in place for years. I know the board's excited to be able to offer this program. When we start to receive the applications, my plan is to, keep the board updated with like what we're receiving, how many we're receiving. I would like to propose that if anybody's up for it, we could, maybe even hand deliver some of the checks ourselves. I think that would be, a nice touch to be able to actually go out into the community, knock on the doors, give to people their checks in person. If that sounds like that's a direction the board wants to take, I'd be happy to be part of that team. Because I think, it's new for us, and I think it's going to be really well received. So really excited to get those documents on next week's agenda. Does anybody else have questions about that? Okay, I'll keep moving right along. So the next item that we actually don't have a cafeteria plastic and foil award. We didn't receive any responses, so we're gonna have to go back out to vendors and see. I spoke with Kristen a little bit about this. There's like one specific tray size that she needs for the food service program that fits in our, in our vehicle. So she has certain plastics that she uses size wise. She has enough to get the year started. So we'll work on the cafeteria plastic and foil, and hopefully we'll have a bid of award, because that's federally funded through the National School Lunch Program. So that absolutely has to be a bid line item. But unfortunately, we didn't get any responses to the first award, to the first, bid package that we put out there. The next item that I have is the Monco STEAM program that Mr. Oxenford explained. And with that program, we would need a vehicle to transport those students back and forth to the campus. So we put out a bid for a 10-passenger van, which is extremely hard to come by in this market. And I was extremely thankful to get a response that they would actually be able to deliver a vehicle within, that they had in stock, and that we wouldn't have to wait for a 2024. And that the vehicle, it's a brand new vehicle. It's a 2023 Ford Transit van, and that it's $62,225. So we will be asking for your approval to make that bid award. This is also a funded program through our Ready to Learn program, Ready to Learn funding through the state. And we're really excited to offer this to our middle school students next year. The next item that we have is our annual Occupational Advisory Committee. And these committees serve our CTE students, our VOTEC students at the high school. And this is just the annual acknowledgement. We have to acknowledge the meeting dates and the list of the members that are on these advisory committees. So that will be available for, again, viewing purposes tomorrow on the board docs, as well as consideration for approval next week. Annually, again, student accident insurance. This is our insurance through a live risk. We cover the student accident insurance, and then there's optional rates that if parents are inclined that they want to pick up, there's school time, 24-hour rates, dental coverages, and there's 3 different plan tiers. So that will be, again, for your consideration for approval. The MCIU Board of Directors election, we actually need, school board members need to participate in the voting for the MCIU board. Even though we don't have a candidate up this year, we still need to vote on all of the districts that do have candidate up this year. So we will have that for your consideration. I believe each board member needs to take their own, needs to take a non-consent vote for this, because each board member needs to record their vote individually. So the 3-year terms, the schools that are up, Jenkintown, Methacton, Perk Valley, Pottsgrove, Upper Dublin, Upper Perk, and Wissahickon all have 1 seat. So I'll need everybody's vote on that. And the last item that I have, I did share with board members late this afternoon, and it is the professional services agreement for the athletic field study. So we talked a little bit about this in the past few months about addressing our athletic fields. We asked ELA to put together a proposal for land development, which would be the next step in the process. And that was received back from them. And the proposal is a lump sum fee that would include survey, base mapping, the engineering, utility location, site analysis, the full land development plan, the permitting for erosion and sediment, as well as stormwater. And the fee for that service is $305,500. And I know that we need to have further discussion regarding that proposal. So I did ask Mr. Baker to join us tonight, and he will be here in shortly. We told him closer to 7 o'clock, so I'll have him here to talk about from the athletic director's standpoint, the problems that he has with our current fields setup, playability, competition, and some of the things he runs into throughout the year. But I think we need to discuss what problems we are trying to solve, and then the areas and which fields we want to focus on. I think we also need to discuss what materials we want to use and the pros and cons of those materials. So at this point, I think I'll pause. I don't know, Stephen, if you have anything else you want to add, but I was going to turn it back to Mr. Hilton to kind of lead this part of the discussion.
I mainly want to listen. The only thing that I'll add is committee members, that from a quite frankly long time ago, and in my opinion, it's probably been too long, but it is what it is. I remember being on the fields with several of you as we toured our facilities. That was last fall. So we have been diligently trying to work on this and push it forward. And of course, everything takes far more time than we want. But we think that improving our fields is a priority and something that should be done. We've talked about and know that we have some Title IX issues to address. And this is an area that we need to address. That being said, I understand, because a couple of you have made me aware that you have some thoughts, questions, concerns. We welcome all of that, and we like to hear all of that, and then see how we can eventually move forward for the betterment of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. As chairman of this committee, I'm going to take advantage of that position to start off. I think you will be amazed to know that I actually have strong opinions on something. So we'll start off by saying that we talked about the EL study last September, and that's when we got the study, and that's when we walked around and looked at the fields. Actually, it was October, and then we didn't hear anything further until last month, May, when we had a spreadsheet showing how much it would cost if we were to put in the 2 turf fields. So I have read the study several times, actually, and I'd like to once again take advantage of my position as chairman to read you what I think are some very salient aspects of this study from page 1. The grass fields are mostly in good shape, and that is partially due to the availability of irrigation on some of the fields, which aids in grass health and recovery. Irrigation is not commonly seen on public school fields, and having that readily available is a significant benefit. Grass growth, even on fields that are not irrigated and have drainage issues due to topography, appears healthy and vigorous. He's talking irrigated, he's talking about Franklin Field. Also the high school football field, which isn't really much a part of this study. Study goes on, through research and site visits, it is apparent that 2 of the fields have drainage issues due to the original construction of the playing fields. Can someone give me an opportunity to share my screen? I'm going to give it a try.
Mr. Hilton, you're a panelist. You can go ahead at any time.
Okay. Tell me if you can see this. Can you see that?
We can.
Okay. So now we're talking about the specific fields that are the basis of most of this study. And the biggest field, of course, is Franklin, you can see, and that's irrigated. And the multi-purpose field of 3 acres and auxiliary field of 1.6 acres. So he's talking about, just so you know which fields he's talking about, Franklin's irrigated already. Multi-purpose the softball soccer fields, which is a multi-purpose field and a lighted auxiliary field. The junior varsity middle school baseball infield has some minor issues. Reconstructing these fields will create proper grading that directs water away into collection systems, allowing for better growing medium, topsoil, and healthy roots, which leads to better grass coverage. An alternative to that will be the implementation of the Cambridge sand slit drainage system, which conveys water off the playing surface. The sand slit option could be used on low areas of the softball soccer fields, as well as the JV middle school baseball field, since the majority of the field is satisfactorily graded. As for the lighted auxiliary field, reconstruction is the best option since the grades are inconsistent all over the field and enclosed ponding areas are created. Using the sand slit system will not be successful. So that was an overview. And about 10 days ago, I asked and received, how many athletes do we actually have, student athletes, and where are they playing? So you can see on this little diagram, this is from Google Earth, you can see we have 270 athletes at Franklin, 87 at the multipurpose, and none at the auxiliary field, just used by the band because of the uneven surface. So now I'd like to bring up something that I brought up many times in the past, not having to do with the fields particularly, but that is the number one issue facing our students, which is climate change. We don't talk about it, but it's going to have an enormous impact on all our students. Maybe not tomorrow, but coming sooner than you think. And my favorite superintendent, well, you have to be careful about putting things in writing. I think about that all the time. Our favorite superintendent wrote a column for the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators. I'm just taking out a little bit, but it's about, we really need to think about climate change as school administrators. And in here he says, as an urban school leader, I'm all too familiar with urban heat island. And based on the average rising temperatures worldwide, it's possibly the most critical issue we face today. So here in Pottstown, unusually, we're a small town, 25% of our land area, of our total land area, it's asphalt, 25%. 14% is buildings, but another 25% is asphalt. That's roads and parking lots. And just a little highlight of where the planet's going. This is just from a couple of weeks ago. Hottest year on record last year. Hottest year in the ocean last year. Hotter than ever before in recorded history. Emissions are not going down, they're going up. And the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is higher than it's been for the last 4.3 million years. So we have a huge problem, and we all have a responsibility to talk about it and to do something about it. Now, the reason I bring this up in particular is, interestingly enough, artificial turf, which has been talked about for us, rather expensive, artificial turf gets really hot. It gets hotter than, certainly way hotter than grass. It gets hotter than asphalt. There's a study conducted by Penn State. Temperature measures in the air were 79, 78, and 85 degrees. And the temperature on the synthetic turf were 120, 130, and 146 degrees. I took the opportunity, as I mentioned to one or two people, at my age, if I dress nicely, I can walk on the Hill School campus, and they might think I'm somebody's grandfather about to give them a donation. So they're always nice to me. So I went on to the turf field, the synthetic turf, they have 3 of them, and I took off my shoes. This was in a nice day. It was only about 73, 74 degrees. I took off my shoes and I couldn't even walk like a minute before I had to get off. It was so hot. And I walked on the grass and that felt good. And asphalt seemed hotter, but this is subjective, not as hot as the artificial turf. So yes, I'm very concerned about the idea that we would have 4.5 acres of a great big plastic mat on top of what was natural grass, performing photosynthesis, that we would cover that all with a big plastic mat, which would be the equivalent of duplicating all our parking lots plus 50% in land area. There's also quite a bit of literature out there about artificial turf being more dangerous to athletes, more injuries. And while there's a lot out there saying how serious it is, I've never seen any study saying, well, grass is more dangerous than artificial turf for athletes. I've yet to see one. I also want to point out, I know it's taken a while, but I usually don't talk, so I'm taking advantage of this, that not too long ago, Representative Mike Sturla of Lancaster, who was the head, or is the head, of the Fair Funding Committee of the state legislature, the Democratic head, been in the legislature since 1990, and actually introduced this year's fair funding resolution that would give us the fair funding over a 7-year period. He talked to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and he said, well, Republicans have to approve this. They've got control of the Senate, and we have to be willing to work with them. So he said, Republicans have insisted on more accountability for any increases in education spending. Representative Sturla said Democrats can embrace that notion that new money must be used to create gains for students. The concept, he said, might be when you give this money, you can't go spend it on AstroTurf. You have to spend it on things that produce educational results. And this is like our #1 ally in the legislature, who's been there long enough to have some clout. So this is a prelude. Having gone through the study, I'd just like to suggest a few things off the bat. I know we're all going to discuss this. I've used up a bit of time here. But now, if we look at the study that was done by ELA, first of all, they're talking about sand slit drainage in the infield of the middle school baseball field. So that's 57,000. We need a new softball field, which they've located. ELA is suggesting putting in the northwest corner of Franklin Field. That's 740,000. Bathroom buildings, I'm going left to right, they're 650,000 a pop, depending how many we want to put in. And then the multi-purpose field, if you put in sand slit drainage, they're saying that would take care of the drainage issues. That's 90,000. And then reconstruct the auxiliary field, widen it, put in lights, that's 750,000. And if we did that, we'd have a whole field that we don't have now. I mean, it's there, but nobody can use it except for the band. And then if you reconstruct the tennis courts, that's 250,000, which comes to 2,500,000 and some change. And there's some other things, I don't want to get into the details, but what we're talking about is getting started, going to Soil Conservation Service, which we has to do. We want to do anything on these 3 fields of any magnitude. That's something I think is a reasonable way to take care of our fields without damaging the environment and without breaking the bank. So with that suggestion, I will now, and all these numbers are from the ELA study. So with that, I will go back to the original slide just for everybody's reference and open this up for discussion. Well, if there is none right now, I see, do we want to let Mr. Baker go first? Because I see he's here now, or do you want to do that? All right, so let's go back to Mr. Baker, because he's appeared since I started my monologue. Okay, Mr. Baker.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for allowing me to be on the meeting. I mean, I caught obviously some of the information, and what's being said. I mean, I guess the 2 points that I really wanted to try and just also kind of emphasize and talk about is one of the things that came from that feasibility study that ELA did well in the beginning of the process was taking into account the number of fields that we have, the number of student athletes, and the number of events on there. And the comparison is, and in that feasibility study, it talks about just the wear and tear, the number of events that we have on our fields already. And it's one of those things where there's obviously pros and cons to both grass fields and artificial turf fields. And one of the things which you get with artificial turf fields is a better wear and tear, the number of events that you can have on there on a daily basis throughout the whole year as you're trying to do that. So that's kind of one of the reasons that came out of that feasibility study that kind of came from when they did the evaluation of our facilities and everything. And one of the other things that, I just want to talk about as well was, yes, the potential process and phases of being able to do the sand slit drainage, leveling out the fields, making them a more playable surface will absolutely be able to provide an opportunity, especially on the auxiliary field, to be able to have more events there. However, that doesn't necessarily address that potential increased number of events, because within the Franklin Street field, if it is approved and moved forward to add that additional softball field, that automatically also directly impacts the location of the fields of other teams. And a simple example, in the fall, there are 2 soccer fields that are over there that are parallel to each other. During the fall season, that one field would be now taken up by that softball infield. In the spring, the Franklin Street field is also home to the lacrosse field for practices and games. So you're talking now potentially 4 teams, because our middle school and high school teams share our 4 middle school and high school teams share the 2 Franklin Street fields. So 2 of them would then have to be relocated. So now you're talking about shifting them over potentially to the auxiliary field. And now you're talking about more events, more practices, more games with that. So it's just something to take into consideration there that, yes, you're talking about pros and cons, but that's one of the things is the ability of artificial turf fields to be able to handle more events, be able to handle more wear and tear. And then the other thing that you have to consider is that the increased drainage and leveling it will improve the field condition on perfect weather days. But if you're talking about rain and other things that a lot of times directly impacts our athletic events and practices, that could be simply shifting teams because it's unplayable. So then teams will have to practice inside, or if they're unplayable in the fact that a lot of times our fields, not even that day, it's the continuous drainage after that. Now, yes, drainage will increase, but it still can be a factor on that day. And a lot of times, we have such windows of time to be able to get athletic events in, whereas if you have something like an artificial turf field, that isn't a necessary factor, obviously barring anything like lightning and thunder, which obviously nobody should be outside for those type of weathers. But that's one of those things where just another thing also just to think about in the take into consideration with that. And I know I did hear something in terms of people talk about injuries wise, and my background, for 14 years, I was an athletic trainer, and, there are pros and cons to grass and turf fields. What the general consensus is that there are pros and cons to both, and there's just not enough informational data out there to say that turf is worse for certain injuries than grass, because there's so many extrinsic factors to think about. It could be field conditions, the level of play, the number of events, the degree of what that athlete is, what their history is, and what they're more prone and susceptible to. So they're doing lots of studies and information on there, 100%. And there are things out there in the media, because you could Google it, and they talk about NFL and how some NFL players are wanting to rather play on grass than turf. But the other things also out there is they're also comparing to the fields that are probably the worst kept NFL fields, and compared to other ones that, so there's so many factors that come into that. I don't want that just to be the only underlying reason why somebody would not consider one option the other because of an injury thing. Like, listen, in the end, you know, I wouldn't be an advocate for this if I wasn't keeping in mind, obviously, the concerns of the student athletes that are going to be on there. And in the end, the other thing also that you have to think about is, you know, what we have right now is this is not having a turf field. It's becoming the norm. I mean, there are 10 of 12 schools in our conference alone that have at least one multi-purpose turf field, soon to be, actually, I'm sorry, 9, soon to be 10, just because Boyertown is very much in the same process as us right now, getting approval and starting construction on starting their process on constructing of theirs as well. So it's one of those things where, you know, you're looking at it where if we have the grass fields here and we're playing on that, but that's not going to ever stop our kids from still playing on artificial turf fields, because it's becoming the norm. You asked me this 17 years ago, what my first year as an athletic trainer, it was not the norm. It absolutely was not. But now that you're talking about it, you know, there is a reason and thought process of why you're starting to see this more commonly now at the high school level, of having these as an option and a resource for their athletic programs.
Mr. Heidel.
Okay. First, Tom, I'm glad that you got to walk through the Hill School property and see their 3 artificial turf fields, because no resident of Pottstown can do that. Okay. The numbers you have.
Not without getting stopped. Let's put it that way.
Yes, exactly. And being told to leave the property. The numbers you have out there, I'd like to throw them out, because what I see, what I envision is not just student athletes of the district, but again, the community. Okay. There are local youth sports that would certainly like to use our fields. To Mr. Baker's comment, it would be nice to have our football field practice on the band field. I'd like to see that as a fully turf football field, because one of the things artificial turf fields will do will be to protect Griggs Stadium. As you said, for field hockey, artificial turf fields are the norm. They are. I just feel that for the community, for our athletes, 2 artificial turf fields, I just don't see how we should not have them. And then I'm just leave it at that.
Mrs. Johnson.
Okay, so I've got several thoughts. One, I just want to say from experience personally and looking at the study that came back, I think it's pretty well undisputable we need to do a lot of work. You know, we need to upgrade, rebuild some of these fields. We need equity between our girls and boys teams, which I feel very strongly about. I want to see the bathrooms out there. Like, there's a lot I think we can do to make our fields, bring our fields up to a level where they're better serving our students and our community. I have a question before I go on. If we do artificial turf, are we putting in fences?
They're not in the, I don't believe that they were in the proposal, and there was some discussion around fences. Justin, do you want to?
Yeah, they were, though, at least for the two artificial turf fields. It was within that proposal that there would be fencing surrounding it. I mean, obviously, one, because it would be a huge investment for the school district, you'd want to make sure that there's obviously a way to be able to regulate the usage of it, obviously, you know, to keep other things from obviously any factors that we can control, at least obviously maintain the longevity of the life of the turf and everything for that. So, you know, but again, also, it's not one of those things where I don't want to say, yes, that we're putting up fencing in, meaning that we're putting up now a gate and a door for they're not supposed to be used and you need to stay off of them. But it's just it's just a common thing that most school districts have with their turf fields. So
Right, and I know it is common. So what does that look like? Like, are those fields then not really usable to the public?
I mean, you know, in my opinion, it's one of those things where obviously, as we're going along with the phases and the processes, you know, if we're moving along and this is the avenue that we're going down, then, you know, it kind of brings up another, to me, series of questions. Correct. Like, you know, what is the usage of it? How is it regulated? You know, there would be lots of things in terms of, you know, figuring out a scheduling a process. You know, we have policies in place for school facility usage already, but obviously, you know, as things change and progress, you know, in different directions, you obviously need to review those and adapt and figure out, you know, what is going to be the best avenue for that. But like, to me, they're a resource. They can benefit the school district, the students, the community, and you know, kind of, in my mind, sky's the limit. You know, obviously, you know, but it would be a process really to kind of get to what we want to try and do to do that.
Our
Okay.
fields are rented out. We have a rental policy. Our fields are rented out now. We coordinate with other groups, you know, so that they can be used. I would assume, unless the board tells us otherwise, that we would continue with that practice, and in fact, probably encourage it, because a couple years ago, when Justin was taking over, we had a long conversation about how we need to interact with feeder programs and create more of a base, so that, you know, more students have been exposed to some of these things and aren't trying sports for the first time in 9th grade high school. By the way, he's done a great job of that. We're not done, certainly, but, you know, between, you know, Trojans of Tomorrow and, you know, coordinating with other programs throughout the community, we've done a lot of work, but we're not done yet.
Yeah, no, and we have made huge progress. So I'm just trying to get a pulse on what this looks like, because I know that some of our fields now are used, they might be rented, but they're also used informally. And so I just feel, I would envision that would end up changing. And while it's not like the ultimate factor for me, I'm just trying to wrap my brain around what it looks like. I mean, I know Mr. Hilton talked a lot about the environmental impact, and I certainly do care about that. And I do care about injury and other health concerns. To me, the reason I'm struggling with this as a potential decision is just because of the price tag. I just am not feeling the return on investment in terms of impact on students. I can think of a lot of other ways I'd want to use that several $1,000,000. What is it, $4.5 or $5 million? That I think would go further. And it's not that I very much value our athletic programs, and like I said, I'm for all the other parts, but that artificial turf part, I'm really struggling with the idea of that.
Mr. Armato.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hilton. First, you did an excellent job of explaining all of the factors and details, both environmentally and from a cost perspective. So I appreciate that a great deal. I will say that listening to this conversation so far today has done nothing except give me a big headache. So backing up a little bit to ask some questions. First, perhaps of Mr. Baker. In terms of use of the field, number of times on a field, and having lived that life before, recognizing that is a big factor. Have we changed anything in the past 5 years, 10 years? Have we changed the number of teams that use those fields? Now, have we added additional soccer teams or lacrosse teams or baseball teams or softball teams? I'm thinking maybe junior high softball might be the only one that I'm thinking is a new addition in the past number of years.
I mean, officially wise, yes, middle school softball probably would be the newest official team added to that. I mean, if you're going 10 years, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, middle school girls soccer was right around that 10. It might be closer to more like 12 years in terms of that.
So to
Uh,
my point, is we haven't changed the number significantly, changed the number of teams or the amount of usage of those fields in, I'm going to say 10 years. The same number of uses that they got 10 years ago are approximately the same that they got this past school year. And as was pointed out, we made, I thought, as a district, we made quite an investment in the Franklin Street fields, and I believe that they are a tremendous improvement from what they were several years ago. Now, it cost us a couple $100,000, if I'm not mistaken, and that included one of the factors that Mr. Hilton alluded to, and that is irrigation. So I'm not sure if any of that becomes a fact, at least for me, becomes a factor of artificial versus natural. So in terms of how we might improve the natural fields as they exist, I believe has a lot of merit and worth consideration before we start thinking about artificial fields. If somebody said to me, hey, you have your choice about what you're going to do, and I think my choice would be, if I was going to have an artificial field, I would have one, and that would be on whatever we're calling it here, the auxiliary field, the field adjacent to the tennis courts, and make that a sports venue. Because most assuredly, and this may exist out there, I don't know, I don't get around to every place, but I don't know of artificial turf fields that aren't fenced in. And they're fenced in for a reason. And that's to prevent them being abused. So therein lies the rub. We want the facilities open to the community, but we would have a responsibility to protect a pretty significant investment. So that becomes somewhat of a conundrum for me. And we've gone down this road before of looking at artificial turf on other fields and what it means in the long run. So I think Mr. Rodriguez maybe alluded to youth organizations using the fields. There's nothing that prevents youth organizations from using these fields now. And perhaps the only thing that prevents it is better organization of youth activities in our community that would get more people on those fields. Because we don't have any problem filling up the gym with youth organizations.
Thank you, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. Echo what John said. Thank you for the time and the effort you put in your presentation. It made us all think, and that's always a good thing. I see this as there's two very big issues as far as I'm concerned. The first is the Title IX issue with the softball and baseball fields. I think we're leaving ourselves wide open right there. And we need to do something about that softball field to bring it up to the same type of facility as Shantz Field is. The second biggest issue for me is field hockey. Our field hockey program is not because of our athletes or our coaches, but it's irrelevant. You cannot play field hockey at any type of level, especially high school varsity, with grass fields from a public high school. It just, the ball disappears. It's kind of a waste of time for everyone. We talk about Boyertown. I know for a fact Boyertown the last 2 years has played every game away because they want to play on turf. They don't want their athletes playing on grass for field hockey. So I think we do need a field hockey field that's turf. I think we do need to do something with the softball facility to bring it up to the speed so it's equal to the baseball facility. I think it would be nice because for field hockey to be relevant, it needs a turf field that we make the auxiliary field or wherever we decide to put the field hockey field large enough so that we could use it with if weather is a question mark to help Mr. Baker out. If it's a rainy day and field hockey's not home, maybe soccer can get on and finish and get a game in. I think that's a great use of it. Far as Mr. Hilton with your green points, they're very, very intelligent and very sufficient. As we all know, I was principal in Lower Merion, probably the greenest community in the state. The schools were built with LEED certification. You can't cut trees down without permits. They have a couple turf fields because they realize that for their athletes to be able to play at the levels they need to play with, they need the turf to do that. So I think it would help our athletes if we do at least one field and bring the softball field up to Chance Field. And Mrs. Oakley, I know you had spoken about funding that you had that we could use for some of this cost. What's the verbiage for the parameters for the using that funding?
So originally I had wanted to use some of the ESSER funds, and we had went back to the state and asked them about that, supporting this, and they came back with a no. So we would have to plan, we're gonna plan to liquidate those funds in the appropriate manner, and we will, plan for, we have capital projects funds. Like I said earlier, there's a little over $9 million in there. And hopefully we will be able to continue to build some of those reserves this year and maybe even next year.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bearden.
Thank you. So coming from playing on our fields, on the same fields that we're mentioning off Franklin Street for lacrosse, that was always a concern because of divots and the unequal pieces that were there that caused issues. And the irrigation piece has really sufficiently helped where it is. Fields will continue to need to be maintained. And I think that is great. I think we should continue to keep those fields. We had issues with going to play on other areas. Initially, we thought we'd be really happy with playing on turf. But what I can tell you is the turf has no give. And it is extremely hot. So you couldn't even sit on it. You couldn't put your hand on it and when it's really hot, right? And that's right now. Back then it was hot. Now it is unbearably hot to where you could burn yourself if you're laying on your elbow or something. The climate is going to get warmer. It is not looking like it's going backwards by some miracle. The fact that it can be hotter than asphalt is and should be concerning. When students fall, like I said, when they fall on grass or they do a pivot move on grass, the grass has give. It absorbs a cleat. It's less demonstrative on limbs when you fall versus on turf. There is no give. And when you do pivots, your cleats get stuck. So one may say, well, you adjust your shoes and you're fine. But most athletes do not prefer turf. So that is a 2024 survey that most athletes do not prefer it. So we talk about going green. The turf does not absorb water. It does not in any way. So there's going to be a runoff. Wherever that turf is, there is going to be a runoff that we are going to still have to maintain and plan for maintenance of. So we're looking at a cost to install turf, but we're still going to have to ensure that we handle and maintain the runoff area where the water will fall from the turf. I do believe, as I have for several years, requested that we bring our female areas and sports up to the same level of where our males are. So I was asking for tennis courts to be upgraded, but I was asking for the softball field to be upgraded, to have proper seating, to have proper coverage, to look at the Shantz field in comparison to our girls softball team right now. It pales in comparison. We all know that. So minimally, the tennis areas and the girls softball field, I'll continue to say it because I've been saying it for years now. But we didn't have the funding that we have now to be able to put some action behind the need. So I understand that. That said, the tennis courts will still be an issue as to where they are located unless proper drainage because of the downhill slope. That will still be an issue regardless of what you do with the other fields. And there is no backup field for tennis. Further, there is no feeder program for tennis coming out of middle school. I'd like to see a tennis program in the middle school, and I'd like to see our current tennis courts have usability, whereas several meets are not having to be canceled or rescheduled for either males or females, because that's really what happens now. So before we, as I've mentioned, I'm for us having extended things, but we need to make our current areas that don't have a backup location, we need to make those consistently usable. And the tennis courts are not consistently usable. So bringing the softball field up to code and making our tennis courts actually viable for use, because even if one would say, well, it's rained and now the water has kind of moved off, it's still wet, it's still damp, and they still cannot play on it. We're looking at doing different things when we don't have a viable tennis court right now. So I feel like we're pushing environmental concern. We know our climate is not getting better. How turf can be hotter than asphalt only lends to the makeup, the product of what the turf is actually made of. And I'm sure there's levels of turf, some quite more expensive than others that would maybe have better quality ingredients than others. But I am concerned about the cost. I feel like we're putting a lot into a turf system when we're still going to have to maintain, because there is going to still be excess drainage going somewhere from that turf area. So I guess I just err on the side of what we are pushing out to our students, which is to be environmentally conscious and good stewards of our environment. I know that's, rhetoric for some, but that's what we are teaching them. We're advising them that they have to create a better space for themselves, for their current state and for future state. And I know it's a difficult task at best for Mr. Baker in juggling, and that is a big juggle and dance, as he's mentioned, to try to ensure that the different teams can play. But going green is not just a conversation topic. It's we're in an environmental crisis. So I'm for our revamping. I'm for us doing right by our female athletes. I'm for us, doing this vetting and brainstorming. I cannot say in good conscience that I'd be okay with turf. That's a large cost to continue to still have to worry about drainage and to worry about what we're doing to the students who are playing on it, because you cannot sit on it. They have to have proper seating. They'd have to have proper coverage. That's a lot. It doesn't absorb the sun and the rays. It makes it worse. So, I mean, everyone has their point of view on it. I'm glad to hear everyone's point of view. But I would like to see a feeder program for the middle school to have a tennis court, and we only have one of those, and it's not really usable majority of the time, to be honest. We have to reschedule and reschedule and reschedule, and sometimes the meets just get canceled. So that's my piece.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. I have two things I'm now curious about. One is turf not water permeable, or is it just that it requires like a drainage system? Like, I guess I thought it was at
Permeable.
least somewhat.
It's permeable. It has tiny little holes in it.
Okay. The other question, I know that the tennis courts are on the list of the things that we're considering, and that they were just toward the end, but along with rebuilding the tennis courts, did that include drainage that would help prevent some of the issues that we are talking about here that Mrs. Bearden was bringing up?
Yes,
Okay.
I asked you that question when we met. I don't remember when it was, but it was a while ago. It was an issue that Mrs. Bearden had made me aware of, and I asked very specifically, what are we doing about all the water rolling down that hill? And he said, you have to fix that. The only way to fix it is to dig a drain, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, that must be addressed.
Okay. I just wanted to, I kind of assumed that, but I hoped that when we fixed the tennis courts, it would help prevent those structural problems in the future. That's it.
Mr. Heidel.
So what Steve and what Tom has said, and John has said, got me thinking, and as well as what you're talking about the tennis court. The auxiliary field, we have 1.4 acres. Now, I was under the impression that that field could not be used as a full-size field for anything, i.e. it couldn't be full-size field hockey, couldn't be full-size soccer. Is that correct? Is that
not unless we redesign it? And Justin, maybe you can help here because you're close.
Now, just as I'm talking this out, Justin, real quick, one of the big problems we have with that field is drainage down the hill from the tennis courts, as it exists right now at the tennis court. Would there be a way to make that field big enough to be one turf field that could serve as a field hockey field, as a soccer field, that length, with rebuilding the tennis courts? Or would the tennis courts have to move to make something that big?
No, within the option, it has that. So basically, the biggest thing that we need to do, and in the more of the architectural draw-ups, it's a little more obvious what ELA did was, the biggest thing is that if you were to move the current lights how they are, they would essentially need to kind of be shifted, and you would essentially be able to make that field so for those you don't know, there are kind of guidelines of what an official size field should be for soccer, field hockey, and it's within a range. It's not like 50 yards wide. It could be between 50 and whatever. It would be on the smaller side, but it would hit the minimum ranges of what would be needed for like an official field for those sports. What you would essentially get though with the multi-purpose field, which is the softball outfield, that is obviously a large enough property. You would they have it right now put in to be whatever the maximum size is, like whatever the full size is, to be able to get the most out of that field. So essentially, yes, they would be able to alter just kind of certain things, the layout of the lights and everything, but there wasn't anything in terms of having to do anything structurally wise to the tennis courts where they're at to be able to make that happen though.
But to put that field down, you'd have to do something about the drainage. And that would include drainage from the tennis courts down that hill, correct? Whether you have to put a retaining wall in, whether you'd have to do something, you'd have to do something for that drainage.
Correct, but I think what was talked about and was if the tennis courts get addressed, the drainage system from that would actually flow into one of the main drainage things there, like located near there. So really, if you address the drainage issue for the tennis courts off of the hill, that wouldn't go towards that field. That would actually now be offsetted off to one of the main drainages that are already located there. And then by obviously leveling that field, you know, putting stuff within that, then you're addressing the drainage of that specific field as well. But then they're saying by addressing that drainage of that exact field, as well as moving the lights that are currently in place there back, kind of almost kind of stretching that field to the most that it could possibly do. They're saying that we would be on that more of the smallest official size that could possibly be used for field hockey and soccer and you know, the other field sports.
And then the other quick part of that would be, are there other schools that have an artificial turf softball field? How normal would that be?
There are currently within our conference, there are 2 within our conference. So Upper Marion School District has an artificial baseball and softball field, and Perkiomen Valley has an artificial turf, softball, and baseball field.
Okay.
Mr. Armato,
Thank you. To steal a page out of your book, Mr. Hilton, I'd like to move this forward as at a faster rate. So I'll throw my 2 cents in and then hope to remain quiet. My preference would be that all of the fields, with the exception of the auxiliary field adjacent to the tennis courts, remain as natural turf, and that we look at how we can accommodate the needs of softball with another field and improve the field that presently exists. One of the problems with the field that presently exists is the infield is entirely dirt. And if you look at Chancefield, Chancefield has a grass infield. That affects the playability of the field and the drainage of the field. So my recommendation would be, or my preference would be, all of those fields remain as natural turf with a look at how we can best address keeping them maintained, and that the one field that, if I was going to have an artificial turf, would be the auxiliary field adjacent to the tennis courts. And if I had my wishes of wishes, although I don't think there's enough space, we would make it a athletic venue similar to one of our neighbors who has one artificial turf field and has made a venue out of it that can be used for both practice and games, both at day and night. That being said, I'm done and I'm happy to move on, Mr. Hilton.
thank you. Seeing no further hands, there's an issue before us tonight because we're going to be voting on it on next Thursday. I believe, Mr. Rodriguez, of course, you haven't had more time to read through this than I have, Mrs. Oakley, but it looks like the ELA proposal, the $300,000 proposal, that's going to be needed whether we go artificial or whether we reconstruct the fields. Is that right?
That is my understanding, but I'd like Mrs. Oakley to weigh in because she had about an hour more with the report than I did.
Yeah, so that it's my understanding as well. And I'll ask them to confirm that it would remain the same if we went all grass or whatever our most environmentally friendly option would be. And if we, we're just looking at one turf surface instead of 2. I believe the full development and survey and permit, I mean, that all needs to happen regardless of surface area.
So to move this along, if you, Mrs. Oakley, and the board would be okay with this, the only thing that I would myself want to change on this ELA proposal is on the first page, where it says this work needed for land development improvement for the following: synthetic turf, softball and soccer field, or drainage improvements, rather than saying artificial turf. Could be used for either, the study. And then the next bullet point, same idea: synthetic turf, multi-purpose, band field, or reconstruction. That way we're covering both options and we don't have to delay the process. We can tell them, go ahead and do their study. Is everybody else okay with that? Katina is? Mr. Klein, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. I haven't used my arrow to get up to Mr. Hidley yet. Where are you?
He's giving a big thumbs up,
Okay.
as is Mr. Armato.
Oh, there he is. He's, yeah, okay. You're at the bottom. Okay, so we can move ahead with that. So I think we're concluded, except Mr. Rodriguez once said to me at a private meeting, something that's always stuck with me. Mr. Hilton, you always have to get in the last word. So I'm going to do that again. Since we're just about adjourned, I'll just point out that the Hill School, which does have 2 soccer pitch turf fields, they're there. And if you walk out the back door of the high school, it's actually closer to the back door of the high school, those turf fields, than they are to the dormitories at the Hill School. Because at the Hill, you know, they walk up the hill and across Beach Street and up another hill. We're closer, you know? So if we're just talking about field hockey, hey, not too far away. And the difference, I'm sure the Hill School would be happy to take our money. They might even do it free. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I mean, it's doable. So with that, having gotten in the last word, I will now call this meeting adjourned and turn it over to Mrs. Johnson. Thank you.
Okay. Could I see you're getting out of your screen share? Mr. Hilton, if you can get those fields for free, that'd be a great great thing. For public relations and community engagement, and I guess for the end of finance and facilities, are there any public comment?
Not at this time, Mrs. Johnson.
Okay. I do not have, I do have the agenda in front of me. One moment. All right. First thing we have for community engagement committee meeting. I have a little note on there. It just says end of year updates, but I did not put together a slideshow like I sometimes do. Mr. Rodriguez, what would you like to say about end of year updates? It can be as brief or as lengthy as you want.
Oh, I was about to share the agenda.
Oh,
So-
you
sorry,
can still if you want, but
Yeah,
it's fine.
so
It's a very brief agenda.
end of year updates, hopefully this was the first year of Power School. The reason we only change these systems about once every 10 years is because it takes a full year of implementation. And I was expecting it to be tough, but it was really tough. High school should have gotten their end of year materials today. Actually, everybody should have gotten access to their report card. If you didn't, let me know. So that is kind of a big accomplishment. We're looking forward to a much smoother year 2. Obviously graduation was, I think, a huge success, and I think I said this before. Thank you everyone for coming. It's the first time in recent history where the entire school board has been at graduation, and I'm appreciative of that. I'm thinking about Mrs. Bearden. laying down the challenge of, getting involved in community and showing up and being a part of some of our activities. So I really do appreciate that. It was also one of our largest classes in quite some time. And I know that a couple people have asked me about, hey, how are we looking for our graduation rate? It's kind of the high school is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. And we're always looking at that metric. And of course, there's some up and down. But we're believing that our graduation rate is going to be even better than this last year. So we always have to hold our breath until October when we submit all the final data, and then hold our breath again when PDE says, nope, you don't get credit for that one. Nope, this one never actually went to Norristown or Philadelphia, or, this one moved out of state, so we can't verify and they're going to count against you. So, nevertheless, we're believing that it's going to be our best in a long time. So we will wait and see. Finally, the last thing that I'll say is, while everybody else, the staff and students, staff meaning like teachers, paraprofessionals, etc., they all went home. The administrative team and instructional coaches went to work. They had their professional development and in-service as soon as school ended. So nothing ended for them. In fact, it was actually longer days and harder work than the previous week. But we are setting up, and now, some folks are, taking their vacation time, which I require them to do, and basically reformulating for the next school year. So I think we're in a really good place, and much of that is thanks to the support of the board. And I know you'll say that's thanks to some of the extra money that we've received. We're not fully funded yet, but even the little bit that we are getting has made such a huge difference. And the last thing I'll say in terms of end of year updates is, in terms of advocacy, this year has been a great year for me in terms of advocacy, because I have not just been able to say, hey, the morally right thing to do is to fund our schools, so that a zip code is not the thing that determines how good a student's education is. But now we can prove it. And we've got some real results that we've been able to share with lots of folks to say, hey, look, our students are doing really well. So that's all I have for end of year updates.
Good updates. On that advocacy side, I'm sure you saw Rep. Cerisi's statement on the House floor, specifically talking about Pottstown and the progress we've made based on Level Up funding and other funds that have leveled the playing field a little more, while also fully acknowledging we have a long way to go. But those results help really carry forward that momentum. So I was happy to see that. Also, yes, noticed the very large graduating class, which was exciting. And I'm always one of the people to ask about graduation rates. So I'll be curious to see those numbers once we get squared away with PDE, and that I know always takes like way more time than I would think it should, but that's the way it works. Website feedback. We have this on the agenda. Mr. Rodriguez, you had suggested it, just that we come to the committee with the website just to talk a little bit about what might be needed there, or just to get general feedback. Do you want to preface that anymore?
Yes, community relations and public engagement, we have watched for years and years that certainly there's lots of interaction at the softball games, football games, Redners, Giant, that sort of thing. But much of our interaction comes through our forward-facing website. And I think we've done a decent job of taking what is a fairly inexpensive website model and made the most of it. It's, there are definitely some things that we'd like to improve, but you only get, and this is really difficult for me to conceptualize without boring everybody with a lot of detail. So no matter what car you like, you can start with the lowest level car, right? That's manual transmission and roll down windows, or you can get the fancy add-ons that, you know, everything is automatic and, you know, the screen pops up and the sunroof, you know, is electric and so on and so forth. So websites are very similar. And we don't have the base model, but it's close. So if we are thinking about upgrading, much like Power School, upgrading a website is significant amount of work, and we don't do it without without a lot of pause, because it can take hundreds, if not thousands of man hours, because all of those files, they don't just, and those of you who work in data and IT and whatnot, you know, it doesn't just happen. You can migrate some data, but a lot of it has to be reconfigured and so on and so forth. So because you are all on the community relations committee, if you take some time and give us some feedback on things that you like, things that you don't like, we'd very much appreciate it, because we're going to be looking at this and deciding whether or not, you know, we'll be recommending to you to upgrade what we have or go, which at this point we're pretty near the top of our upgrade. So what you're seeing is the best Ford Focus, if you want to call it that. Nothing against Fords. My first car was a Ford, loved it for a lot of years, but you know, this is the best of the base models. One of the things as you're looking here, and thank you, Mrs. Johnson, for doing that and allow some context. One of the things that I love to be able to do is run a little video here instead of just pictures. That's going to be an upgrade. That means that we have to go to a totally different carrier. So is that important? Is it not important? A lot of other districts have it, but just because they have it doesn't mean we necessarily have to. So that I probably took too long to explain that, but
No, that was good context. So I guess the ask is, I mean, and I can go through, you've all seen our website, right? So I guess is the ask here to do a little research or get feedback, gather feedback and come back, or did you want some level of immediate feedback?
I am open to either. If committee members have immediate feedback or things that you know you've heard and you want to share, I have my notebook and I'm ready to take notes. If not, that's totally fine. Maybe you go on there and you're like, hey, Stephen, it's fine by me one way or the other. No problem. If you definitely hate it or you actually like it and find it functional, those are the two extremes that I'd like to know. If you love it or hate it. If you're ambivalent, okay, that's all right. You don't have to tell me that.
Ms. Kansianik, do you want to offer some thoughts?
Yeah, I've been on some like local schools websites, and some of them have a lot of bells and whistles, but it's also harder to use, harder to navigate, harder to find what you're looking for. So that would be like one concern. And and then on our website, I think the way that we get to the menus can be a little can be improved. But I also want to keep the yearbooks. The past yearbooks, that's been a big hit with people. I like it. So those are my immediate thoughts.
Thank you. Great feedback.
And I'm up for trying to just gather some feedback over the summer. I am kind of just ambivalent, which you didn't need to hear, but that's all I am. The car analogy is fitting. I feel like it does the job for the most part, most of the time. So if other committee members and other board members want to just kind of keep an ear to the ground and ask around over the summer, I think that's worth doing. And even, you know, if the public is watching on this video and you have specific thoughts or like things you couldn't find or things you wish you could see, I think that would be, you know, you can message us or you can put it in the chat or whatever. Ms. Kansianik?
Yeah, what would the time frame be that you're looking to change this?
Undefined. we looked at this 2 summers ago. And we were pretty excited about some of the options out there. But, yeah, I'll be very frank, it was mainly the ability to use video more effectively. But everything else was a potential downside. It was more expensive, more cumbersome, required more people to maintain, more upload, more, what do you call it? Like when you're, oh gosh,
Loading?
like automatic upgrades that would have to like, oh, it's got to go down once a week or whatever. And now they do it at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, but still, like, someone has to manage all that stuff. So the cost was like, as you can imagine, much like a car. It was sometimes for just a little bit better, it was almost twice as much. So then we backed off and we're like, no, we're not doing this. Power School's more important. Other things are more important. And for a while, I will tell you that this was on my list because I got a bunch of complaints like, oh, it's not user friendly. It's not user friendly. We tried to listen to some of that and make it more user friendly, and create multiple spots. That was the biggest thing. I can't find anything. So, okay. So we began to put things in multiple places. That has died down, but it's still on my list. So that's why I'm kind of checking in. Like, should I push this off for another year, or should we really start looking at it?
I was just asking about the time frame because I think we're still trying to get used to Power School, and I don't want to personally, I don't want to learn something new right away.
Yeah.
That's good feedback.
I'm still learning, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that was why I was asking for the time frame. But if we don't even have it looks like it's not going to be happening tomorrow. So
And that was going to be my feedback too, is like, I was really excited for a year where we didn't make any huge technology changes personally. Not, and whatever, I don't have the biggest feelings about that, but that was, it was, Power School was a challenge, even just from the parent side, it was, and all the more from the administrative side. I know it was a massive headache. Mr. Heidel, I thought I saw you raise your hand at one point, but I wasn't sure.
Just to say to the website, I think it's more interactive than other districts in our type of range. Don't we do most of our videos direct them to Facebook or to a YouTube video? We don't really do a lot of on-site storage. Nor do I think we really have to. I think that, that's where most people go to look for videos and stuff anyway. So linking it off of our district websites, they're trying to post a ton of videos and upgrades to that just doesn't seem worth it.
Do we also put video from like committee and board meetings on board docs, or is there another place it's stored?
Yes.
Okay.
Board Docs has all the committee videos, this video, and all board meetings. Yep. So
Okay.
thank you, Mr. Heidel. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you like what we have.
Yeah, I don't see that, anything changes. I mean, no one's complaining, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I think most people go there and look for the calendar. I don't think people go there looking for their schools. I think, school information people basically know by that. I think really some of our biggest social media stuff that happens, like I said, on Pottstown Chit Chat, on Pottstown Families. When you put out something there about kindergarten registration, I think that reaches a lot more people than anything you're going to put on our district website.
Great.
That's just how I see it.
The other big one, and I know because I get the complaints from parents if we don't have it up, school lunch menus.
I'm going to share my screen again real quick, just because I want to, there we go. Remind everyone, if they're watching this and they want to send us a public written comment, you can do that on our website. If you go to board, at the top here, public participation in board and committee meetings. This page was recently revamped, complete with very helpful tutorials from Mr. Rodriguez about various ways to attend board meetings, including to be able to submit a written public comment, which is helpful for people who maybe don't want to either speak in the more public format of a board or committee meeting, can't be here at that time, or just you like to write stuff out. So that is all there as well, with videos and printed or like written instructions. Just wanted to make everybody aware of that. Okay. Seeing no other thoughts. The only other thing we have on the agenda is advocacy, I believe. We covered that a little bit, and Mr. Hilton even covered that a little bit in the previous meeting because he mentioned Representative Sturla and his fair funding bill was a House bill. The bill number is 2370, and this is a bill that just passed the House. I'm trying to think of what day it is. Last week, I guess. I'm losing track of all time because June is just really weird. So it is a bill that covers a 7-year phase-in of full fair funding. It is basically implementing the Basic Education Funding Commission's recommendations, and phasing those in over the course of 7 years. There are still year-to-year decisions to be made, but it kind of sets a default into the way that it would be handled. It would be transformative in terms of giving a sense of predictability and kind of just setting that baseline for the legislature of here's what we need to do, here's what's been agreed on, and moving forward with that. That bill also had cyber charter reform, very similar to what was in Joe Cerisi's bill that passed back last year. But they put it all together because they wanted to show that they belong together, that fair funding belongs with cyber charter reform in particular, because cyber charter tuition and the way that it's structured right now is such an incredible drain on schools. All schools, including schools that wouldn't necessarily get much more money under what we would call fair funding, they will be tremendously helped as well by cyber charter reform. So that bill passed the House. It passed the House with some bipartisan votes, not too many, but it was a little bit bipartisan. Is already over at the Senate. It is now wrapped up in budget negotiations. Nobody expects the Senate is just going to outright pass that. But it is useful in that it created a little bit of a standard from the House of here's where we stand and here's what we think we need. So I would just encourage everyone on the committee, on the board, anybody watching, just to reach out to anybody in the Senate that you have connections with, including our senator, but also beyond that. I know I've been sending out action items from the Pennsylvanians for Fair Funding side. They need to hear from us as much as possible. And if you have relatives, if you have friends in other parts of the state, it's worth asking them to reach out as well. Because the more of a groundswell of, yeah, we really, really need this, and this is a high priority, it's going to help to increase the odds of better funding in the negotiations. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on either that or other legislative issues that may have come up? Okay, that's all I have. Are there any public comments?
Not at this time, Mrs. Johnson.
Mr. Armato, go for it.
Thank you. So as the conversation relates to the website is one of the components of our communications plan and how we put our face forward to the community. I think Mr. Rodriguez outlined that we have tried to address concerns regarding different facets of the website as they come to us. Whether or not that means that we need to start back to ground zero and buy a brand new car, I'm not really convinced that that's necessary for us. The components that we have been using, including the weekly emails that go out from the superintendent's office and the emails and text messages that go out to from our various buildings to their communities, I think has been vital for us. The use of Facebook, which you can argue whether or not it is an old person's platform or not. There must be a lot of old people because there's an awful lot of action on Facebook. And particularly this year, our new venture, not necessarily new, but more aggressive venture into Instagram for that community of younger people, I think is all proven to be beneficial to us in terms of communicating and building a strong relationship with the community.
Agreed. We've been very multifaceted and taking advantage of lots of channels, and I can practically, like, I've used, or I shouldn't say I've used this, but I've had numerous Wednesdays where I get the community, all the things going on in the community email, and I'm like, oh, it must be Wednesday because it's that consistent. And I might forget what day of the week it is, but that email is so consistent. So I think that's great. And I think the predictability, isn't that funny, John?
Only that since you said it's Wednesday, it must be Superintendent's Day or the superintendent back when, if you were old enough, oh, it must be Prince Spaghetti Day because it's Wednesday. Well, you have to be really, really old to know that one. Sorry.
I'm not that old. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But yeah, anyway, I think it's good to take advantage of all of those different channels. I do think it's good to have a very solid website. Like, I think that's one place where people should know that they can come to the website and they can find what they need, whether that's the calendar or I assume, yeah, our school menu or lunch menus or how to register. Like, those are things where somebody who isn't yet in the loop on social media or, connected via text or email or Instagram or whatever, they would expect to find up-to-date, solid information at the website, but I don't think anybody thinks it needs to be a Cadillac. If people come and they're like, oh, this is a really nice website, that's great. But I don't know. I just think the value is limited as long as it's doing the job. Mr. Hilton. Oh, I'll let Mr. Hilton go if he's ready. And then
Okay, I didn't see his hand.
oh, well, I took it from what his picture did, but maybe not. Go ahead, John.
So to a point that Mrs. Kassianik made, and we can thank Mr. Hilton for it, one feature that we have on our website that I have not seen on any other school district website any place is the archive of our yearbooks. And that is a direct result of Mr. Hilton's not only efforts, but also financial support. I have referenced that to alumni and to people outside of the community over and over again. It is something that sets us apart.
It is so cool. So cool. Okay. Seeing no other hands or comments, we can adjourn this meeting. And the next meeting is, it looks like August 8th. And I'll see you all, I guess we'll see you sooner than that. So have a good night, everyone.
Thanks much. Good night.